Okay. Hello, everybody. So we're down to our last 3 meetings. Woo! Oh, woo! So a couple of announcements before we begin. The first is that that session that I've promised you on things you should know about getting into graduate school will be next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Next Tuesday, 6 p.m. I'll send out an email to the Blackboard website email list. It will be next Tuesday, 6 p.m., but it will not be in this room. It will be in Franz 1178. So it'll be in the big room of Franz Hall. In the past, I've been able to get that audio podcast. It will not be video podcast because I don't think they're set up for that. But it should be audio podcast if you can't make it there. Let's see. The second announcement may be of more interest to at least a third of you. So is Asher here? Where are you? Back there. Asher. Okay. So Asher, you're going to want to thank Asher in a minute. So Asher came to my office hours last week. And he wanted to go over one of the exam questions. And I was kind of dismissive because the exam question was one of the easiest exam questions I put on the exam every year. And I always put on a question that has something to do with the Milgram study and the fact that the people who only go to like 250 volts are the heroes of that study. Okay? And every year, pretty much everyone in the class gets that right. And this year, 70% of the class got that right, which is a lot of people, but a lot of people didn't. And he came sort of saying, well, I think this other answer is the right answer. And I said, well, yeah, but the hero's answer is really the right answer, and I talked about that at length in class. And he said, no, you didn't. And I said, yeah, I did. Go watch the video. And he said, I did. So, I watched the video, and he's absolutely right. I did not talk about it. I got off on a tangent, and I never got back to it. And so this thing that for the other 12 times I've taught this, I always talk about at length, completely skipped. And so while I'm very happy that 70% of you were able to figure out that they were the heroes, that impresses me actually, that in the absence of me saying it, a lot of you figured it out. It wasn't a fair question, so we're going to go through, and for everyone who got that one wrong, we will add the point. So thank him. And again, I think this is just, I always look for these things, but I think this is demonstration of sort of me falling prey to the things that I'm talking to all of you about all the time, which is I had such a strong assumption that I talked about this, not because I actually talked about it this quarter, but because I've talked about it every other quarter, that I couldn't see the fact easily that I hadn't talked about it. Okay, so we'll go through. Everyone who got that one wrong will now get it right. Yeah. I don't think it's going to affect the curve because the people who are at the very top almost all got that one right. So, I think the average score was for the top 10 people was a 46.4. My guess is that might become a 46.5. So all of you are going to move up a point. No one who already got it right, I think, is going to be hurt by it. So I think it actually ends up benefiting everyone but me, who kind of looks like an idiot. So, but fair enough. That's why I'm up here. I'm assuming that's what the other question was too. That was nearby, because that's the only obvious other question to ask there. Okay, so we almost got to the end of attribution last time. But I want to make sure I go over these last 2 slides, just in case I put something on the exam about this. I would hate to have not spoken about it. We talked a lot about the fundamental attribution error last time. This ubiquitous error we make all the time, every day, everywhere we go. We're constantly assuming that people have the dispositions that would correspond to the behavior we see even when there's really good situational explanations for why anyone would engage in that behavior, why people who don't have the corresponding disposition would engage in that behavior. And there's no ambiguity. People make this error. Okay? So if it's so fundamental, if it happens all the time, okay, we can ask ourselves, why would we be built this way as human psychological beings? But perhaps more importantly, why hasn't the world gone to hell as a result? And of course, in many ways the world has gone to hell, but not because of this so much. There's other things that are at work there, like Wall Street and so on. But for our purposes, we make these mistakes about people all the time, and yet we seem to get by pretty much okay in our social lives. It doesn't seem to, really, really deeply get us into trouble in the same way where if there's like a fundamental error in the way they calculate stuff on like the particle collider or thing like that, it would like destroy the universe, right? This doesn't seem to destroy even our personal universes. So Bill Swan, who did all that self-verification stuff I told you about a few lectures ago, he had this really important paper back in 1984 where he introduced this idea of circumscribed accuracy. Okay? And what he suggested is that it is true we make the fundamental attribution error, but because of a lot of other circumstances, it doesn't end up mattering that much. Okay? And he said there's sort of three key factors that prevent the fundamental attribution error from being really big problems in everyday life. So the first, and perhaps most important, I think it is the most important, is the fact that we tend to see people in the same situation again and again and again. Okay? So if you make a mistake about why someone behaved a certain way, you think it was their personality that led them to act that way, when in fact it was the situation. As long as you keep seeing them in the same situation, they're going to tend to keep acting in that way. So you might be wrong about why they behave the way they did, but if you want to predict how they're going to behave in that same situation in the future, you're probably going to get that part right. So you're going to be able to predict their future behavior even if you're wrong about why they behave that way. So, imagine that there's some restaurant that you go to frequently, and every time you go there, there's the same waiter. So, my wife and I go to the restaurant Oris at least once a month. We love this restaurant, but the unusual thing is we always have the same waiter. We've probably been there 25 times and have had the same waiter 22 of those 25 times. Okay? And so, there's a script of what happens in the restaurant. The waiter is there to basically help you through getting everything you need to enjoy your dinner. And so at some point you sort of motion that you're ready to order if they haven't come over already, and they come over and they take your order. And then I say, we really want to order some more of this, and they get you that. And, I want another Diet Coke, and so they bring you that. And then at some point you go like this to them, and they bring you the check. Right? So they do all these things. Every time I ask them to do something, they do it. And so one might make the mistake of assuming that the reason that person is doing what they do is because they're really just a subservient kind of person who likes to do what others ask of them. Okay, now, I picked this as an example because we all know that's silly, right? We all know that the real reason that this person is acting in a kind of subservient manner is they're being paid, and they're being paid in tips and so on. These situational factors are what really drive the desire for that person to behave that way. It probably has nothing to do with their enduring personality. Okay? But if you make the fundamental attribution error in this case, that's the error. You're assuming the reason they do these things is because of their personality. Now, as long as I keep going back to that restaurant, I'm not going to get into too much trouble treating him as if he has that personality characteristic. Because every time I see him, he's in that same situation that sort of causes him to adopt that role. So I won't make a big idiot of myself in that particular situation. However, if, I'm walking down the street somewhere else in the area of that restaurant, and he happens to be on the street, and I say, hey, by the way, would you go into that 7-Eleven and get me a Diet Coke? right? He'll either just laugh at me or punch me out. But this is the case where I'm going to get into trouble because the situational constraints are no longer there. So when you see people in the same situation repeatedly, you can make a mistake, and yet it still might not lead to any negative consequences. It's only when you move to a new situation that you're likely to see the negative consequences. And so because we often see people in the same situation, this might not be such a big problem. A second thing that you don't get from all the experimental research on the fundamental attribution error is the fact that in reality, most people choose their situations a good deal of the time. Okay? So I think at some point I said, well, the person who is in the library, we can't assume they're really a quiet person by nature because there's a strong social norm that you should be quiet in the library. Okay? And that's probably true. Okay? Lots of people go to the library, at least they did when I was in college. Maybe it's changed now as, libraries only hold books and you guys don't actually know what those are. And certainly your kids will have no idea what a book is. It's a program on my iPhone 3000. Anyway, it's the book program. Right? But the person who's a librarian, who chooses to spend all their time in that situation, they've probably chosen that situation for a number of reasons, and one might be that they actually do like a quieter environment. Compare the person who wants to work as a librarian versus the person who wants to work as a bartender. Right? They've probably chosen those situations to spend their time in because of some of their personality differences. So it is true that situations do cause people to behave in certain ways, but outside of the experimental lab, we often choose our situations. Okay? And the last one, which I think is a little bit more iffy, but still worth considering, is that if you spend enough time in a situation, that situation might change you. So your personality might shift to be more in line with that situation, to be more accommodating of that situation. So if you have a job that requires you to be very social and gregarious, that may really sort of in a long-term way bring out the more social side of you and cause you to become a more social person. Okay? So the fundamental attribution error really happens, but despite that, and because of some of these other factors, in the real world, we can often still predict behavior, even though we might have the wrong explanation for why we've made an accurate prediction about their behavior. Okay, any questions on this? Because this is the last slide for that lecture. And then we're going to change gears. Nope? Okay. Now, one lucky member of this audience did I say something funny yet? Is going to walk away with this $10 bill. Woo! It's a real $10 bill. See, look, it falls just like a real $10 bill. Doesn't say counterfeit anywhere on it. So we're going to have a Dutch auction for this $10 bill. And I need to explain the rules to you for how this Dutch auction works. Okay, we're going to have an auction for the $10 bill, which means people in here can bid for the money. Okay. We will start at $1. So somebody can get this $10 bill for $1. We're not there yet. I'm explaining the rules here. Okay. We will go up in $1 increments. Okay. And whoever has the highest bid will pay what they made as their highest bid, and they will get the $10. Now, you might think, is he allowed to do this? And I thought that too. I did this once or twice back when I first started teaching, before I had that thought, and then I had that thought. And so when I went and checked with the powers that be, they said, well, if you donate the proceeds to charity, okay, you're allowed to do it. So after we're done this, I will discuss those options. But the money will not go directly to me, so I'm not doing anything that benefits me personally in this case. So the person who has the highest bid will pay what they bid, and they get this $10 bill. Critically, though, this is important, the person who makes the second highest bid, the I almost won but I lost bid, okay, will not get this $10 bill, but they still have to pay what they bid. That's what makes it a Dutch auction. I didn't invent these. They already existed. So both the top and second highest bids will pay what they bid, and the top bid will physically get this $10 bill. Okay. Now, are there questions from people who have not been in a Dutch auction before? Okay, so let's start at $1. Who would like to bid $1? Okay, this is the first hand I saw go up. Okay, we have a bid for $1 for this $10 bill. Okay, would someone like to bid $2? $2? Okay, so we have a $2 bid for this $10 bill. Would someone like to bid $3? We'll go back to you. $3. Would someone like to bid $4? Okay, the first hand I saw was that woman back there. Yep. So, okay, so $4 bid there. Would someone like to bid $5? $5? Okay, $6? Okay, guy back there, very excited. Good, got him. $7 bid for this. Okay, that's the first one I saw. Okay, so we have a $7 bid for this $10. $8 bid. Okay, woman in the black there. $9 bid. Okay, back there. $10 bid for this $10 bill. That guy back there. Okay. So, we now have a $10 bid for this $10 bill. I will now do the unthinkable. Would anyone like to bid $11 for this $10 bill? Now, okay, in the black there. Okay. So we have an $11 bid for our $10 bill. Would anyone like to bid $12? Now, I need to point out that you have made an $11 bid, and in the blue shirt back there, back here, oh yeah, you made the $10 bid, correct? In the blue shirt? Okay. So, if we leave it here, you will pay $10, you will pay $11, and you'll get the $10 bill. And you will not get anything. So, would you like to bid $12 to get the $10 bill? Where's the person? Raise your hand if you keep saying yeah. So it's you. You made, sorry, I was looking at the wrong person. Okay, so you want to bid $12 for the $10 bill. So, does anyone want to bid $13 for this $10 bill? I need to see a hand raised. Would anyone like to bid $13 for this $10 bill? What? I need to see a hand raised. I can't just hear. There's 350 of you. Yeah, it doesn't get me anywhere. Can I see a hand for 13? No questions. You can bid. Trust me, you just want to listen now. You just want to stop and listen. You can. We'll talk after. No. So in the black, the guy in the black has a $12 bid. The guy in the blue, guy in the black has an $11 bid. Guy in the blue has a $12 bid. Now, would anyone like to make a $13 bid? I need to, you in the back. Really? You in the back. Okay. $13 bid, back in the corner. $14 bid. Okay, he just outbid himself. You might want to wait a turn. Does anyone want to make a $14 bid? So just to put it in context, if I get this correctly, so we have a $13 bid in the back, which means he would give me $13 and I would give him this nice $10 bill. And the guy in the blue here would give me $12 and get nothing. So, anyone want to make a $14 bid? Okay, he's still trying to outbid himself in the back. You have the high... Oh, so she's really the one with the bid, is what you're saying. So you're representing her. So you're not bidding against each other. You are one unit. You're a social psychological organism sharing, diffusing the responsibility for this decision that you've made to bid now $13. So you two have the $13 bid. That's one bid. So, blue sweatshirt. $14 for $10 or $12 for nothing? Yeah. Okay, so we have a $14 bid now. $15? Anyone want to bid $15 for the $10 bill? Yeah, we have a $14 bid now. So do you want to make a $15 bid to keep up? What? So the blue sweatshirt, what's your name? Sorry? Rupert. And in the back, what are your names? What's that? Jessica. Jessica. You work out a lot, Jessica. Okay, we have Jessica and Rupert. Rupert now has a $14 bid to become the owner of this nice, shiny $10 bill. And Jessica has a $13 bid to become the owner of nothing. So, I'll just ask the appropriate person. Jessica, would you like to make a $15 bid? Yes, you would. Rupert? 16? Yeah, of course. Jessica? 17? 17? Rupert? 18? Jessica? 19? Absolutely. Rupert, 20? Jessica, 21? Backpacks as collateral? Do I take credit? I do. I take credit. I have a little credit card machine up here. I don't like the way this is going. I'm just going to cancel this altogether. Yeah. Because I've made my point, okay? I never intended to have anyone actually get... This is actually an 1849 $10 bill worth $25,000... No, I'm kidding. Okay. Okay, so... What was going on there? We just had people bidding $20 for $10 bills. I know the investment climate isn't so good these days, but that is not a good investment. Right, what's going on here? What were the two of you thinking about? Well, I have to say, I was impressed that somebody got into the game at $11. That does not happen often. Typically what happens is people get into the game at $3, $4, $5, and then they get sucked into the game. Right? They get sucked into the game because now you're considering getting $7 that you pay if you lose, and the other person paying $8, which means they'll actually make $2. So the thing is that you stop thinking about how is this actually going to play out for me, and you think about how am I going to do relative to that other person. Because at $20, you guys have both lost, right? Whichever one of you gets the money just lost less. Because in both cases, you're paying a lot of money for nothing, essentially. Okay? And there's nothing special or unique about them. I do this every year, and sometimes it moves faster, so I let it go longer. I've had it go up over $50. Yeah, I've had it go over $50. And It's because at every moment, it's just like the Milgram study. At each moment, you're not evaluating, does this make sense in and of itself? You're evaluating it in comparison to something else. And so going up $1, or in this case $2, to make sure that you get versus don't get the $10 always seems like a good idea in the moment. But it doesn't take into account the fact that the other person's thinking the exact same way. Okay? So we think from sort of a bad perspective in order to make sense of what's going on here, and we focus more essentially on beating the other person than we do on the best solution. Now, when we were at, say, the highest bid was at $15. Okay, highest bid is at $15, and somebody else is at $14. The person at $14 is motivated to up the bid, because they don't want to pay $14 for nothing. What should they have bid? Anyone know? There's one right exact answer. If the bid is at $15, no, but that's close. 25. Okay. If you bid exactly $10 higher than the other person, now you've matched your outcomes. You're both going to lose exactly the same money, which means there's no longer an incentive for that person to outbid you. Okay. But 23 was a really good guess. That was very close. Okay. So you want to outbid by the exact amount of the thing, which of course in itself seems kind of ludicrous, but once you get yourself into the situation, it's kind of the only way out. Yeah? I said I was going to increase the bids by $1, but you can always go higher. You've seen auctions in the movies, right? $1, $2, $1 million to the man in the hat with the glasses on in the back of the room. Right? The other thing is, they never talk to each other. Right? They could have looked at each other and said, we're kind of in this screwed up mess. What are we going to do here? Right? Because they didn't know I was going to stop. But nobody ever talks to each other. Why? Because they are adversaries. But they're not, right? They're in this losing spiral together. Okay. Let's move on to the next demonstration. There's 3 demonstrations to start this, and in some ways they're just too much fun, so I take my time with them. My magic trick. It's not really mine, but it'll be mine for the next moment. And if you know this, as with all magic tricks, don't shout out the answer, because then you're just that lousy person who ruins it for everyone else. But if you don't know, please play along. So, I am going to guess a card for one of you out of a normal deck of playing cards. Actually, I'm going to guess for all of you. So here's a set of 5 cards, and I want you to choose a card that's your card, and I want you to focus hard on this card. Okay, really embed it into your mind. Okay. And I'm going to make that card disappear. Okay, so here we go. Let's see if I make your card disappear. Now, for people who don't know, don't say. For people who've played it. For all the people saying, what? Oh, huh? So you can do this online at www.hondomagic.com. And I suggest that you go and do this with, say, your roommate at home. Okay? It'll be a different experience for them doing it alone than it will for all of you. Because all of you know that there's no way I made all of the cards that you individually selected individually disappear. Although some people do tend to think that. You think, some people say, I know what happened. You made us all focus on the queen because it's in the middle. Except a lot of you didn't pick the queen, right? But those of you who did might think that's what I did. But hopefully, as it's dawning on some of you, none of these cards are the same cards. Not one of them. Okay, so here are the cards I started with. Here are the cards that were left. Okay, and when you do this online, show it to your friends. I guarantee 95% of them will have no idea how the heck the computer knew what card they picked. And it's great. It's a lot of fun to watch. Okay? Because what they do is they start trying to figure out what's going on. Okay? So they do it again, and they do stuff like, if they had their hand on the mouse the first time, they'll be like, I'm not going to put my hand on the mouse this time. I probably move the mouse a little bit towards the one I was thinking of. And then, like, the next time, if you've got, like, a webcam in your computer, they'll, like, cover the webcam. Or they'll look away so that, where they're looking can't give away what it is. Okay? When I used to do this, I used to not do it in class. I used to just tell everyone to go do it. And I had students who showed up the next time crazed because they still hadn't figured out what it was after doing it like 150 times. Like, how does it do that? Okay. Now, you think of different things when you're in a large group like this, but when you're alone, what's amazing is that it doesn't occur to most people most of the time that just all the cards are different. There's just enough similarity in the distribution of what the cards are in terms of their rank, in terms of their suit. They just sort of assume that the card trick is playing by the rules, but card tricks never play by the rules. Okay? And so you're making a decision. You're sort of judging this experience as kind of a valid but somehow magical experience because you assume that the person doing the trick isn't cheating. And of course they're not cheating. They made your card disappear. They just made everyone else's card disappear too. Okay, last demonstration. How many people have seen the show Let's Make a Deal? It's such an old show, like me and 5 other people in here. Okay, good. So, Let's Make a Deal was a show back, I guess, in like the 70s primarily. And it was such a it was a game show. And everybody came to the game show basically dressed for Halloween. They came in these like homemade, goofy costumes. And they would sit in the audience, and then Monty Hall was the host of the show, and he would sort of play various games with them, giving them a chance to sort of win various kinds of prizes. So it was kind of like, what's the show with Bob Barker, although not with Bob Price. So it's like Price is Right, except with costumes and weirder games that they played. And one of the famous games that they played was sort of choosing where the great prize is behind 3 doors. So he would show you these 3 giant doors up on the stage. There'd be, there's a stage, there's 3 big doors, and he would say, behind one of those doors, okay, is a fantastic prize. Usually it was a brand new car or something like that. Of course, a brand new car from the 70s is not something that you really would have wanted had you known it was a brand new car from the 70s, but back then they thought that was a good thing. Yeah. Wayne Brady hosts it now, so you can go watch it again. Do they still do the 3 doors? Okay, so go watch Wayne Brady do the 3 doors. Now, we're going to play a version of this. Okay? And we're going to play it just like Monty Hall did. Okay? So, let's say that you're asked, where do you want to choose for the fabulous prize? 1. So let's say that you've all decided you want to choose door number 1. Great. You've chosen door number 1. Monty Hall says, okay, well, we can show you what's behind door number 1, but first, let me tell you something else. I'm going to show you what's behind door number 2. I'm going to show you what's behind one of the doors you didn't pick. And door number 2 opens, and there's a table, and on top of the table, there's a pack of chewing gum. Door number 2, it's got one of the lousy prizes. It's got nothing good. Okay? Nobody's that much of a fan of gum. They'd rather have that over the car that they could sell and get a lot more gum for. So you now know that door number 2 is not the winning door. You've chosen door number 1. Monty Hall shows you what's behind one of the other doors that you did not choose. And he always shows you what's behind one of the doors that has a lousy prize. So he always picks a door to show you that you haven't chosen that has a lousy prize. So now you know that the winning prize is behind door number 1 or door number 3. So here's the question. Okay? There's 3 options here. I'm going to give you 3 options, one more than Monty Hall gives. Option number 1, stick with your first choice. Wait, I'm telling you the 3 options, and then you'll vote. Or you can switch to door number 3. Okay, you can't pick door number 2. That's out of the running now, and why would you? Or the third option is you can vote for it doesn't matter whether I pick door number 1 or 3. Okay, so let's take the vote. How many people want to stick with door number 1? Okay. How many people want to switch to door number 3? And how many people think it doesn't matter? Okay, so about a 30-30-30 split, which is better than I usually get when I do this. Now, it turns out that there's a systematically right answer to what you should do. Okay? Oh, those are the options. We voted. Okay? The right answer is to switch. And it's not just sort of a right answer, it's mathematically the right answer. It is the only right thing to do in this situation. Okay? Now, 2/3 of you either thought you should stay with door number 1 or it doesn't matter. Okay? And for those people, part of the interesting thing about this demonstration is that nothing I tell you will convince you otherwise. Okay? I've done this demonstration for years, and people just say, no, it doesn't work. That's impossible. That can't be the right answer. Okay? I'll take you through the logic, and then I'll take you through a very practical way of figuring out that this is the right answer, and many of you still won't believe me. Okay? And that's one of the really cool things about social psychology. Tell people the right... It's not like geology where you tell people the right answer and they go, that must be the right answer. How would I know? Right? Social psychology, people think they know the right answer. Okay, so when you chose initially, any door you chose had a 33% chance of being the right door. Okay? You chose door number 1. 1/3 chance that that's the right door. That means there's a 2/3 chance, a 67% chance, that the car is behind door number 2 or 3. Okay? Now, Monty Hall doesn't randomly show you a door of the 3. Okay? He always shows you one of the 2 doors you have not selected that has the lousy thing in it. Okay? And I said that. So he shows you this door, knowing full well that the lousy thing is behind that. Now, at this point, most people have the intuition that, oh, okay, so it's a 50-50 split here. Okay, but it's not. Okay? There's still a 67% chance that it's behind one of these 2 doors, and knowing that it's not behind this door, 2/3 of the time it will be behind this door. This door is twice as likely to have the car as this door. Now, back on the original show, almost no one ever switched, and they usually got it wrong. Okay, I don't know if they do better now with Wayne Brady. It's possible. But this is very frustrating for the people who don't get it right initially, because it just seems like, but I'm picking between 2 doors now, it's got to be a 50-50 probability. But Monty Hall is not giving you just random information. He's giving you information constrained by telling you about one of the doors you didn't choose that doesn't have the right answer. Now, if that doesn't satisfy you, and for some of you I know it doesn't, here are all the options. Okay? So imagine that you pick one. Okay? So no matter what you pick initially, there's 3 ways it could really be. So you could pick one and it could be behind number 1, 2, or 3. You could pick 2, it could be behind 1, 2, or 3. You could pick 3, it could be behind 1, 2, or 3. So if you pick one and you stay with one, well, okay, that particular time you got it right. But the other 2 things that might happen, you would have gotten it wrong. And it turns out that out of the 9 different combinations, staying on the one you picked initially only gets you the right answer 1/3 of the time. And it gets you the wrong answer 2/3 of the time. Okay? But this is like a judgment illusion, because illusions are things that stay even after you know how they work. And for lots of people, even after you go through these different things, and there are no other options, these are all the options. Right? There are still people who are right now thinking, it's still 50-50. I don't buy it. Okay? Because that happens every year. So these 3 little demonstrations are meant to introduce judgment and decision making, or how poor our judgment and decision making can be. Now, I talk about this in social psychology because much of what we do socially is making judgments and decisions about ourselves and other people. So the fundamental attribution error is a judgment about another person that is inaccurate. Okay? When stereotypes, which we'll get to in the next lecture, are misapplied, okay, that is an inaccurate judgment. Okay? When I decide what to do going forward based on inaccurate information, that, again, is another kind of decision. So what I want to do is, rather than just focusing on the social level, is talk about some more basic ways in which our judgment and decision-making tends to be sort of flawed or biased. And these basic level biases that we have in our judgments and decision-making can help us to understand why the social varieties of biases occur. So the idea is that some of the things that occur for us in our social thinking may simply be a result of the fact of the way that we sort of make sense of information in general, even when it's not social. I think that's a very good example that will convince a few of the people who still aren't convinced. But I like that. I'll use that next time. What? Oh, so what he said was, you must be one of the people who's still not convinced. I'm kidding. So he said, if somebody isn't getting this, you could say, imagine there's 100 doors, and you've picked one door, and basically Monty Hall says, okay, you've picked door number 1. I'm going to open doors number 3 through 100. Do you want door number 1 or door number 2? And door number 2 was one of the 99 that had to have it. So yeah, that's, I think, a really good example. Howard. He's the guy with the fake name, but now I know his real name. Okay. Good example. Okay, so let's go through so almost everything I'm going to tell you for the rest of lecture today comes from Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They are simultaneously cognitive psychologists, economists. Danny Kahneman's job now is in public policy at Princeton. Danny Kahneman got the Nobel Prize in economics probably 4 years ago. But he's trained as a psychologist. Amos Tversky, who passed away, would have gotten the Nobel Prize with him, but they don't give it posthumously. Almost everything I'm going to tell you about comes from Kahneman and Tversky and Kahneman. They are the most successful research duo, I think, in the history of psychology, and Kahneman's still going. So in this first one, imagine that you've been told that an earthquake is about to hit UCLA, and we have very good information to indicate that it's going to kill 600 students. Okay, no one in this classroom. 600 students. Okay, 2 plans have been proposed by the regents. We don't trust them. Okay, 2 plans have been proposed by somebody you trust in the university. Okay, if program A is adopted, 200 people will be saved. If program B is adopted, there's a 1/3 chance that 600 people will be saved, and a 2/3 chance that no one will be saved. Okay. How many people want option A? Raise your hand if you want option A. Raise your hand if you want option B. Okay, more on option A, but not so unevenly split. In the lab, 72% of people say, I want 200 people to be saved. Guaranteed. Now, they asked another question. Same setup. Imagine an earthquake's about to hit. It's going to kill 600 people. 2 plans have been proposed. If program A is adopted, 400 people will die. If program B is adopted, there is a 1/3 chance that no one will die and a 2/3 chance that 600 people will die. How many people want option A? How many people want option B? Okay. Most of you just don't raise your hands. You're busy writing. I'm sure that's what it is. Okay. Here, 78% of people choose option B. Okay. Now, this again is a situation where you're getting to see both of the message framings. Okay. So it's easier to figure out what's going on here. But the key thing is that these 2 questions are identical. Right? In both cases, if program A is adopted, 200 people will live, 400 people will die, guaranteed, no risk. This is what will happen. And in option B, there's sort of a risky outcome that involves a 1/3 chance that everyone will live and a 2/3 chance that everyone will die. But depending on whether you use it in terms of the language of saving people's lives or thinking about the people who will die, the loss that will occur, people make very, very different decisions here. Okay? And so this is why these slides are all titled Gains and Losses. Okay? So both problems are objectively the same, but when we think of gains, we are what's called risk averse. Okay? So when we think about the lives that could be saved, we want the sure thing of the 200 lives being saved. Okay? But when it comes to losses, or more specifically preventing losses, thinking about preventing losses, we are risk-seeking. So we will go out of our way to have the opportunity to lose nothing over a sure thing of losing 200, losing 400. Okay? So the questions are identical. The only way they vary is whether or not they're framed in terms of their gains or their losses. But mathematically, there is no difference, which means logically, your answer should be identical to the two. You should always choose option A or always choose option B. And even if you chose the same option each time, or even if you didn't put your hand up either time, my guess is you had a different feeling reading the statements in the gain writing form than in the loss format. Right? So I think most people have a sense of like, oh, that first option feels different when it's 200 people will be saved versus 400 people will die. That feels different. Okay? Now, in my typical lecture on this, I spend about a half hour after this talking about Kahneman and Tversky's prospect theory. It's really awesome, it's really important, and if you're interested in kind of a deep understanding of why this happens and why 1 death is a tragedy but 100 deaths is a statistic, go listen to my podcast from last year on this, because I go at length about it, but we're behind schedule, and I've decided that that's the thing I'm going to cut today, because it's a really long time that it takes to really explain one idea. But I want you to have some exposure to this idea that we're very sensitive to whether the exact same numerical information is framed as gains or losses. Okay. So I believe it was Stalin who once said, 1 death is a tragedy, 100 deaths is a statistic. And the idea is we are far less affected by hearing about 100 deaths than we are hearing about 1 death. Or, to put it a different way, if you're hearing about a death every day, the 100th death has a way smaller impact on us than the first death. Okay? And we all know that, right? When the Iraq War started, the first death, the second death, there were specials on TV about their lives and who they were. Well, we're thousands of deaths in. Does anyone know who died yesterday in Afghanistan? Nope. Somebody does. Okay, I'm not suggesting nobody does, but right? 99% of you? No idea. Somebody died yesterday in Afghanistan? Probably.
It's kind of like in the book Stumbling on Happiness, Variety, right? Where he says, like, you know, when you go to a restaurant and you eat dinner, you might choose variety, like spice of life the first time, but if you choose every month, you'd rather stick with the same thing. Or you should stick with the same thing rather than change it.
So I love that study. That's by George Lowenstein that he talks about. But that is a different phenomenon than this. This has to do with the fact that we simply aren't as sensitive to... So the distance from 0 to 1 psychologically is very different than the distance from 1 to 2. And from 0 to -1 versus -1 to -2. There's a big difference psychologically between those two, and it explains a large range of very interesting phenomena, but it takes a while to really go through showing it, and it's confusing enough that I tend not to ever actually test on it. So, if you're further interested in that, I can give you the slides from last year, and you can listen to the podcast. But otherwise, we're going to move on. So these are sort of the classic heuristics and biases that Kahneman and Tversky talked about in their 1974 paper. This paper's been cited like 5,000 times, which is obscene. It's so foundational to so many different fields of study and the biases we show, whether it's social psychology or economics or cognitive psychology. Okay? This is really, really sort of core and central. And so there's these three biases, and we're going to talk about some studies related to each one. Okay. I think one or two of these might be in the tipping point. I'm not sure if any of them are in the chapters you read in the tipping point. I know I used to have an example that I started getting amazed at how many students in the class got the answer right, and it was because they just read it the week before in the tipping point. Okay, so simple question for you. Are there more words in the English language that start with the letter K, for instance, like the word king, or have K as its third letter, as in acknowledge? How many people think there's more words that have letter K as the first letter? How many think the third letter? How many think that because they know the study already? Yeah, because nobody figures that out on their own, right? Everybody, when they're sort of confronted with this for the first time, says, yeah, there's more words that start with K. Right? For those of you who said K in the third letter, go on, tell me 5. Right? So that's how I know that, okay, you've seen the study before, that's cool, but you didn't actually know it. And my guess is that even knowing it, and this is where sort of the illusion part comes in, even those of you who raised your hands and said, I think there's more with K as the third letter, you don't really believe that. You don't, right? You know technically it's true, but you don't believe it. I don't believe it. I can't think of any words with K in the third letter except for acknowledge because I use it, right, in my studies. It's hard to come up with those, and that's kind of the point. Availability has to do with the fact that we sort of go into our head and say, okay, let me try to think of some words that have each of these two characteristics. And so we sample what we can come up with in our mind, but it turns out it's a heck of a lot easier to come up with words that start with K because there's an easy procedure for doing that. Right? I can just go king, kitchen, right? Kerchew. Okay? But there's no easy way to come up with the K in the third letter words. That's not an easy thing to do. You can't go look in the dictionary for those. Right? In a sense, you're kind of looking in the dictionary of your mind, but there's no way of indexing what's in your mind easily for K with the third letter. Okay? So this is a lot like the introspective thinking study, where this is rigged so that one of these is a lot easier to generate the answers for than the other, and people take the number of things that they can come up with easily as an indicator of what must be true of the language in general. Okay? What's true of the language in general is that there's a lot more words with K in the third letter, but it's not our intuition even after we know the facts. Okay? That's what's partly important about this. Okay. Are you more likely to die from a shark attack or falling airplane parts? How many people think you're more likely to die from a shark attack? How many think airplane parts? How many of you just raised your hand for airplane parts because you think I'm going to say whatever I don't really believe and that'll be the right answer? Yeah, stop that. Okay. 30 times more likely to die from falling airplane parts. Yeah, you didn't think that, did you? Even if you raised your hand thinking that must be the right answer because it sounds crazy. Right? Yeah, it's really crazy. 30 times more likely. Incidentally, when I've done this demo, people almost always say, oh yeah, shark attack's more likely, except 2001, 2002. Then, all anyone could think about were the attacks, and man, there must have been a lot of falling airplane parts. Right? It was salient for them. So, this fits with the availability heuristic. We think about Jaws, right? We think when we hear about a shark attack, it's big news. It gets all over the news, especially here in Southern California where we have beaches, and so we think, well, that could happen. Okay? So it's very vivid. It's easy for those things to come to mind because they're such dramatic examples. But how many of us have heard stories about people who died from, like, a falling propeller? We don't hear about those things. I'm not sure why, because that makes interesting news to me, but we don't hear about those things, except we had a very vivid example in 2001. And so for a while, that became a more accessible available image for us. Okay? So, cognitions that are more available or accessible or vivid in memory are estimated as occurring more frequently. This is the availability heuristic. If it comes to mind easily, I use that to estimate how frequently it occurs in the real world. Okay? That's not a real good way to estimate how frequently things occur in the real world, because maybe my mind doesn't have the right information in it, or doesn't have the information indexed the right way. Okay? But a lot of the time it'll be okay. Why? Because if you have sort of equally vivid or non-vivid experiences, those that you've been exposed to more will come to mind more frequently. So if the experiences that you're comparing are sort of not pitted against each other to be different in how vivid they are, or how easily you have a procedure for getting one to come to mind versus the other. So for instance, if I ask you, are there more words that start with S or J? Everyone says S, right? Unless you think this is another one of those trick questions, and then you say J, but you'd be wrong if you said J. Here, S is the right answer, because you're applying the right procedure to figure out the number of words that start with S or J, and so there it works well. The more you've been exposed to S starting words, the more easily those will come to mind. And so it works for those cases where you're using the same procedure to think of both, or when the two things that you're comparing are equally vivid or non-vivid, equally non-vivid. Okay? But when you have one category of things where the events themselves aren't terribly frequent, but they're very vivid, it sort of cheats the system. Because the system responds, your brain responds, whether you've seen it a lot or you've seen it a few times, but it's really vivid and intense. It doesn't care about that distinction. Okay? And so we end up making a decision in these cases that gets us in trouble. It's mistaken. Okay. Second heuristic. That's availability. Representativeness heuristic. I know it's a long one. Representativeness heuristic. And we're going to start to demonstrate it with the erroneous law of small numbers. I just added the erroneous today because I always have the law of small numbers up there, and then people always think, oh, there's a law of small numbers. Okay? And there isn't. So let's start with the example. Imagine that I have just flipped a coin up here 5 times, and it came up heads each of the first 4 times. What most likely came up on the 5th flip? Heads or tails? Doesn't matter. Right? This is one of those ones where it doesn't matter. The 5th flip is fully independent of the first 4, unless it's a con coin where it's weighted to cheat. But if it's a traditional normal coin, right? The 5th event has nothing to do with the first 4 events. Okay? But we assume it does, and when we assume it does, that's what we believe to be the law of small numbers. We act as if there is a law of small numbers, but I just want to caution you before I explain what that is. It's not a real law, it's the erroneous law. It's the erroneous belief we have in the law of small numbers. So the law of small numbers works the following way. If I flip a coin 1,000,000 times, it's going to come up about 50% of the time heads and 50% of the time tails. That's what tends to happen over, infinite number of repeats. That's what a fair coin will do. And so that's the law of large numbers. And that one's real. There is a law of large numbers. Over time, it's going to approximate that 50% mark. The longer you go, the better you're probably going to do at that. Okay? But we tend to assume that there's a law of small numbers, where even in just a few trials, we expect to see a pattern that is representative of what we think randomness should look like. Okay? And so we think it should be about 50-50, and so if it's been all heads, we think, well, now it should be tails, because that gets you closer to the 50-50 mark. And so it's time for this pattern to move towards the 50-50 mark. Okay? Now, this one seems a little odd, but we hear gamblers all the time say, I'm about to get lucky, right? Because I've had some bad luck so far, so, my turn's coming. Right? Or there was an interview, I think right before I taught this last year, there was an interview with Kobe Bryant where he had just come off of maybe 2 or 3 games where he had terrible shooting games, but he just kept going. And then the game that they were interviewing him about, he had 60 points, right? And they said, man, how do you keep going? And he said, well, look, I just know that, like if I miss 2 shots, like I'm due on the 3rd shot. And if I miss 3 shots, I'm due on the 4th shot. And if I miss 4, I'm due on the 5th. And he just kept going. Right? And it's like, well, he's not due. Right? It doesn't work that way. And there's actually been a lot of statistical analyses on what's called the hot hand effect. And it turns out that when you look across sports in general, when people think they have a hot hand, the statistics don't support it at all. Okay? The statisticians who have looked at this essentially say there is no such thing, statistically. That's beyond my statistical pay grade, so you can go look up hot hand effect, and they will explain it to you, but I can't really explain it beyond that. But I do know that Kobe, in this particular case, was applying the law of small numbers. He was saying, look, I'm a 50% shooter from the field, so if I've missed 4 in a row, I'm due. Except he isn't. Okay, here's another example of the same thing. Here's 2 series of coin flips. Heads, 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 tails, 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 or heads, tails, tails, heads, tails, heads, heads, tails, heads, tails. Now, if I just flipped a coin 10 times, which of these is more likely to have occurred? Series A or Series B? Everyone thinks B. They either say it or think it. But actually, these 2 series are exactly likely the same probability of occurring. Okay? Because each of these is a very infrequent event. To get this exact pattern, if you flip a coin 1,000,000 times, okay, you will see this exact pattern, okay, the same number of times in that 1,000,000. About the same number of times. Both will occur infrequently, but this looks more like our representation of randomness. This looks like what we expect random events to look like. This doesn't. And so we say, okay, this one must have actually occurred because that one looks like with what I associate with randomness, even though this one is just as likely to have occurred. Incidentally, I meant to bring this in. I was going to do a 4th demonstration. I totally forgot to do it for you guys, and it's too late now. I know, right? Sad. So Darren Brown, that guy from England who pretends he's a magician, but he's really just kind of he pretends he's a psychologist using sort of his special social psychological powers to essentially dupe other people. Okay? And it's kind of a clever ruse. Instead of saying, like, I really know magic, he says, I really know science. And because I know science, I can get people to do things. But in fact, he's using the same old tricks that everybody has always used in magic, but he gives a new cover story. But one of the things he does, which is in this same realm, and I'm going to get the details wrong, which is why I can't do it right now, is he does this thing where he will wager a lot of money on his ability to predict what 3-flip sequence will happen first. So you're going to flip a coin over and over and over, and what you're looking for is like, so you're doing this against someone else, okay? And they say, I predict that the thing I'm waiting to see is heads, tails, tails. Okay? So you let the other person go first, and you're going to flip a coin, and when you get 3 in a row that said heads, tails, tails, okay, that's when that person's event has happened. And then Darren Brown says, okay, you have heads, tails, tails. I'll pick another 3-item sequence, okay, and we'll see which of our sequences shows up first 5 times. And whoever's sequence shows up first 5 times gets $1,000. Okay? And he gets it every time. He wins every single time. Okay? And it's another sort of cool, I think it's called the penny ante trick or something like that. But the key thing is that, yeah, I should just send you the video link. But essentially, as long as you predict something like, I forget exactly what it is, but maybe like THT, you predict something that's based on what the other person says first. Unless that person's thing comes up as the very first 3 coin flips, yours always has to come up first. And I'll send you the video, and maybe I'll explain it next time. It'll make more sense. But the first time I saw it, I was like, how the hell did he do that? And he did it again and again and again, and you can do it to anyone you want, and it never fails. Okay? It's pretty crazy. All right, let's move on. That really was an unnecessary tangent. Okay. Okay, for this next one, I'm not going to take you through the closing your eyes, but I'm going to show you the way this actually works. So imagine that we tell one group of people that they're going to hear about a person, and that person that they're going to see described has been drawn from kind of a bucket of little descriptions, and in that bucket there are descriptions of 80 lawyers and descriptions of 20 engineers. Okay? And other people are told that the bucket has descriptions of 20 lawyers and 80 engineers. So they're very different distributions of people in those two buckets. You're told you're pulling from one bucket or the other. And then you see this description. Jack is a 45-year-old man. He is married and has children. He is generally conservative, careful, and reserved. He shows no interest in political and social issues, and he doesn't like to argue. He spends most of his free time on his many hobbies, including home carpentry, building model airplanes, and mathematical puzzles. And then subjects are asked to indicate the percentage likelihood from 0 to 100% that they think this person is an engineer. Okay? And most people give a very high probability to this person being an engineer. Okay? What's interesting and important is that the probability they assign to Jack being an engineer is almost identical whether they are told that they're pulling out of a bucket that has 80 engineers out of 100 in it or 20 engineers out of 100 in it. Okay? That part gets completely ignored. What people are sensitive to is the extent to which this description is representative of an engineer or a lawyer. And that's kind of where the end of their thinking goes. Okay? So what they ignore are what are called the base rates. So the base rates are, in one case, there's an 80% base rate probability that it's an engineer, and in the other case, it's a 20% base rate probability that it's an engineer. Okay? And the point here isn't to suggest that in one case you should say that's probably a lawyer, and in the other case you should say that's probably an engineer. Clearly the description sounds more like an engineer, and that's important, relevant information. But so are the base rates, which means your judgments should at least be affected by whether or not you're told that this is from a pool of mostly engineers or a pool of mostly lawyers. Instead, people tend to neglect the base rates and focus only on how representative the description is. So this is what's called neglecting the base rates, and it's one example of the representativeness heuristic. So when people neglect the base rates and go only with the representativeness of the paragraph, okay, that's an example of the representativeness heuristic. Okay. One more example of the representativeness heuristic. And you may have seen this one before. Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. You can tell this is an old study. No one's had to do an anti-nuclear demonstration in a long time. And so what you're asked is, which is more likely? A, that Linda is a bank teller, or B, that Linda is a bank teller and an active feminist? So how many people think the answer is A? How many people think the answer is B? Okay. When this study is done, the vast majority of people say, I think it's B. Okay? You get like 75% of people, 80% of people saying it's B. And the problem with this is that people say this description is representative of someone being a feminist, much more than it's descriptive of them being a bank teller. So I need to pick the option that has feminist in it. Okay? But just statistically, there's no way for option B to be more likely than option A. In the most extreme cases, they're equally likely. But in 99 out of 100 cases, option A is always going to be more likely than option B. It has to be numerically. Okay? And that's because of what's called conjunction effects, and this is an example of what's called the conjunction fallacy. And so for people who haven't seen this before, it tends to be very frustrating that the answer could possibly be A, because it's just, but she's a feminist. Okay? And A doesn't say Linda is a bank teller and not a feminist. It's just Linda is a bank teller. And Linda being a bank teller has to be at least as likely and probably more likely than Linda being a bank teller and an active feminist. One way to sort of understand this is imagine that two people flip a coin. What's the likelihood that person A gets heads? 50%. Likelihood that person B gets heads? 50%. Likelihood that they both get heads? 25%. Okay? So the conjunction of two events is always less probable, or at most equally probable, as any of the two events alone, because the way you get the conjunctive probability that A and B both happen is by multiplying the probability of each together. So if we imagine that there's a 90% chance that Linda's a feminist and only a 10% chance that she's a bank teller, the likelihood that Linda is a bank teller and a feminist is 9%, because it would be 10% times 90%. Okay? So, even if you got this one right, and to this day I still have some of the same emotional response myself, it doesn't feel right. Right? Intuitively, it feels like B was the right answer, even if logically we know A was the right answer. So, those are all instances of the representativeness heuristic. Okay? And so what you're doing is you're using your subjective sense of similarity between, like, say, a description that's observed and some kind of expected profile or pattern, like what random coin flip should look like, or what the feminist option person should look like, or what the engineer should look like, and you're ignoring other critical statistical information, just ignoring it altogether, ignoring the key information to actually get a more objective answer. Okay. Now for this next one, I'm actually going to ask some of you to close your eyes. So, you're group A, you're group B. If you're in the middle, just decide if you're an A or an B and go with it. Okay? Group A, over here. Group B, close your eyes. Everyone in group B, close your eyes. Keep them closed. Okay, keep them closed. Everyone in group A, read this. Group B, keep your eyes closed. Think about your answer. And now, I want you to write down the answer to this next question. Just write down your best guess. Okay, so now group B, open your eyes. Group A, close your eyes. So group A, close your eyes. Group B, keep your eyes open now and read this. Okay, and now I want you to write down the answer to the following question. Okay, everyone can open their eyes. Okay, so how many people said that the Mississippi River, when they wrote down their answer, is under, let's say, under 1,700 miles? Raise your hand if you answered that the Mississippi River is less than 1,700 miles long. Okay, a lot of people over here. How many people said it was longer than 1,700 miles? All right, most of the people over there. So the real answer is that it's 2,350 miles. Now, what happens here is that group A read this question first. Is the Mississippi River longer or shorter than 750 miles? And most people say, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's longer than that. And then I asked, how long is it? And they start from 750 as a mental anchor and go up a bit, and probably come up with 1,200, 1,300, something like that. Okay? Then the second group was asked, is it longer or shorter than 3,700 miles? And most people say, oh, I know it's shorter than that. But they use this as an anchor, and when I ask them how long it is, they work their way down from there. And they go, okay, well, it's not 3,700. Maybe it's like 2,500. Okay? And so what you get is the initial number that you're given to compare to, right, is what starts as an anchor, and then you adjust from that. Okay? But remember, that initial number has no real relevance other than the fact that someone just asked you a question. Is it higher or lower than this number? Nobody said that's the right number, but that ends up serving as an anchor, and then we adjust away from that. So this is called the anchor and adjustment heuristic. So we start with an anchor, and then we adjust from that insufficiently so that we don't get back to the original point. Another example of this. Okay. If 366 people are necessary to ensure that 2 have the same birthday, how many are necessary to make it 50% likely that 2 have the same birthday? Okay. A lot of people answer 182. Right? The right answer is 23. It's hard to come up with the right answer 23 that actually involves some math, but 182 has a strong relationship to this anchor that you start with. Right? So it's like half of that. And so you figure, well, I need this many to get to 50% probability. So 50% of this is about that. It's a strong anchor, and then you don't adjust far enough. Okay, we'll pick up there next Tuesday. Have a great turkey, everybody, or tofurkey if that's your thing. No office hours this week. I'll be cooking.